Mr.
Discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to just overall.
Please.
And it's
To
overall budget. It's regarding the comments that I submitted last time for review.
This is a discussion about the flood control district. Are board members willing to let it go and have a broader discussion at this point for Supervisor Miller's purposes?
I would be comfortable doing that.
Very well. Go ahead, Supervisor
Okay.
Miller. I just wanted to make sure everybody was in agreement.
I just wanted to get my discussion out of the way because it involves all of the various districts. And to start out with, I'd like to make my original tax neutral budget proposal really clear. It is for a budget that is tax neutral overall. And there are three components: the flood district, the library district, and the primary. And if one of them goes up, that's okay, but we've got to find the money somewhere else. That's what my tax neutral budget is about. The bottom line, zero increase to the taxpayers. When you get to the bottom line, when you get your tax bill, it's going to be the same as last year. I know that a lot of discussion ensued about it being revenue neutral. No, it's not revenue neutral, it's tax neutral. I hope our revenues go up, our state shared revenues go up this year. And then truth and taxation neutral was another comment that was made. No, that means each of these three separate districts have to be tax neutral. I mean the bottom line, because we talked about the library district and the need to keep the library district budget up. But if we find the money in one of the other areas, I'm good with that.
Mr. Chairman, to that point.
Mr. Valadez, please. Supervisor, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Miller. So for clarity's sake, what we're talking about is a different kind of definition than the statutory definition. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not truth and taxation neutral. It is tax neutral to the taxpayer. So the bottom line, there's of the three components, one of them, like the library district, I think we all can agree that the library district probably needs to go up. But if we find the money in the primary or in the flood district and make the net effect to the taxpayers. I was advocating on behalf of the taxpayers. That's where I was coming from on this.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Miller, sorry, even I was confused about that until right now when you were clarifying.
Okay, that's why I wanted to clarify, because I thought folks were confused about it. So what I would like to do is, if you add up those three mechanisms, the net effect to the taxpayers is zero. The bottom line, you open up your bill, you look at the bottom line. One of them may have gone up, another may have gone down, but the bottom line, you have a net zero impact on your tax bill. And that's what I proposed a couple of weeks ago. And I would like to thank Supervisor Bronson, Supervisor Valadez for directing that we have an analysis of the original proposal, and thank you to Chuck and staff. I know that was a lot of work to go through that and to put out some various potential options. And I feel that opening up that topic a couple of weeks ago for dialogue, and I think that it really helped us to look at it, analyze it, and discover that there may be some alternative options and maybe new suggestions. And so I would like to go through, just kind of summarize. In our discussion a couple of weeks ago, Supervisor Bronson, when we spoke about the library, and that wasn't in my original proposal, I just spoke maybe we could find some money there because that rate is going up 2 cents. And with the valuations going up, that means that's why we're here today with a truth and taxation hearing. And Sharon expressed the need to increase those taxes district in order to sustain the library's operations. There's a couple of new libraries coming online, and so and a part of the capital improvement plan, and I'm not going to disagree with that. I want to make it clear that it is just the bottom line that I'm looking at. So if the library district goes up, I think I can agree that that district going up, as long as the others go down, I can agree that, you know, there is a need to keep that or increase that rate. And the next thing I did, I proposed to maintain the same level of safety, service, and funding from the Regional Flood Control District from the prior fiscal year. I did identify $8.4 million increase in their capital project spending that was a potential for working to make the overall tax neutral. The analysis in the June 11th budget memo that Mr. Huckleberry provided back to the board, he says, reducing the flood control district rate and levy to achieve neutrality is easily executed if the board so desires. And therefore, according to that analysis, we have a potential, I believe, to achieve neutrality. It was something over $1 million, but there was that $8.4 million increase that we could potentially look at possibly pushing out some projects or even eliminating some projects. So I'm asking that we take a hard look at that one again to identify and see if there's any projects that could be placed on hold to maintain this tax neutrality. We already know, Ramon also asked Mr. Huckleberry to provide an analysis to include alternate options to make the budget tax neutral again. And I think that discussion was a good discussion, and it takes all 5 of us to provide the thoughts, input, analysis to find the most beneficial budget for the taxpayers. And next I'd like to, one of the proposals I had was reducing the certificates of participation. And when I read Mr. Huckleberry's memo and we had the discussion in the meeting last time, it was clear that that would impact our transportation funding. So I believe that should be tabled. It wasn't that much money, but it should be tabled until we are in a better position in terms of the pay-go budget. Excuse me. And Chuck said that to keep that $5 million and the $5 million increase per year additional funding going to road repairs, we need to keep that in place. So I would agree that we should. I just wanted us to be aware that we need to start looking at moving away from COPS as soon as we get some funds built up to be able to do the pay-go without these certificates of participation that cost a lot in interest. For the overall county fund balance, in order to maintain our bond rating, we cannot fall below $34 million in the analysis that was done by Mr. Huckleberry. And it concluded that we will have a balance after changes proposed by Supervisor Elias in a prior meeting of $38 million. But there was another $1.4 million potential liability for the DTAP program and the Superintendent of Schools Accommodation District. If you deduct those out, that still leaves a potential of $2 million to use for the tax neutral budget out of the reserve without impacting our bond rating. And then the analysis regarding the various object codes, it appears that there was a very thorough analysis done there, and that there's not a lot of money to be had there. So I would be content with that without the inclusion of this option to create a tax neutral budget. Vacancies, we do have the 1,150 roughly vacancies, vacant positions that are budgeted. And in this memorandum, Mr. Huckleberry said it would be, some efforts have been made and will continue to be made to reduce positions where possible. It does address the complexity to reduce the attrition. And also, per that analysis, the budgeting vacancy savings could create a budget hole that we'd have to address the next year. And what if we didn't eliminate any positions or budget for vacancy savings, yet found a way to use these vacancies to produce expenditure savings? And one of the things, and I have a copy here for each of the board members. If we could do a hiring freeze for as many months as we need to reduce expenditures and give the taxpayers a neutral budget. That isn't something I didn't discuss previously, but we could keep these vacancies in place until they're appropriately eliminated or hiring has taken place. It could provide us conservatively with about 4.16 million for each month that we execute a hiring freeze. And that's if we freeze 1,000 of these openings.
Supervisor Miller, just a clarification, that 4.1 is per month, and the total then would be 8.3?
If it was 2 years, yeah.
2 months.
Excuse me, 2 months. Did I say 2 years? Yeah, 2 months. So it could, there is a potential there for 8.3 million if you froze all 1,000 of them. The other option is maybe to do half of them if we have some hiring that must absolutely happen. Do half of them and freeze them for a little longer period. And I think I have 3 months in the calculations that I did that comes up with a little over $6 million. It would create the potential that we could end up with a tax neutral budget. And I think we all heard from the various managers during the budget hearings how difficult it's going to be to fill these positions anyway. That they are having a very difficult time with almost near full employment with the booming economy, and it's very difficult to find folks to fill them. So I'm thinking it might not be such a hardship to freeze some of these for a few months. That is a potential. And then also with that 8.4 million from the Regional Flood Control District, the 2 million from the overall general fund balance, the potential of freezing hiring, I still think we can provide a tax neutral budget without a lot of impact. And I really think that we should go back on behalf of the taxpayers, sharpen our pencils, and work to get a new tax neutral budget accomplished by working together to give the taxpayers a break without increasing property taxes. And I think with Chuck's analysis on the pay-go, the debt service will be dropping in fiscal year 21, which opens up a lot more options for us in terms of finding more funding. And so that is my proposal. It's not complex, it's simple, and I think it's very doable. I think the hiring freeze, we've had numerous of these vacancies that have been budgeted but not filled for quite some time. I haven't tracked it completely, but I know we've had significant vacancies every year since I've been here. And I know, Chuck, a few years ago you got a lot of them out of there. So I'm proposing that we go back to attempting to try to get there. And I know we have until, was it August 5th, to actually pass the final budget. So we do have time to go back and do further analysis and have more discussion among the Board of Supervisors. I think it's been a really difficult year for taxpayers. We know what happened at the state, and I'm not real happy about it. Our federal tax cuts, income tax cuts, got absorbed by the state of Arizona. They did not do the conformity bill, which would have allowed us to keep our tax cuts, and that didn't happen. And then with the $32 vehicle license fee, and on and on. The taxpayers keep getting hit over and over, and I know that isn't our fault that the state did that, but I think that if we could do something, if we could go back, sharpen our pencils, look at this now, and make a decision on whether we can accomplish this, I know, you know, we need more analysis, and I appreciate all the work that the county staff has done to help us evaluate this. So that is my proposal. I know it's on the flood control district, and I'd really like to hear from everyone else what you think.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order in regards to Supervisor Miller's suggestion that we, and she's correct, we do not have to adopt until, I think, August 5th. But what is the consequence of us? Can we legally continue, should the majority of the board feel comfortable doing that? Can we legally continue these budget hearings until August 5th? We've advertised, so this is just a point of clarification. What do we have the ability to continue, I guess is really what I'm asking.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Bronson, I think that the board does have legal authority under the open meeting statutes. Once the hearing has been noticed, the board can then recess it to a future date. So particularly, I think the important hearing is the truth and taxation hearing for purposes of statutory compliance. And so I guess what I would suggest is if the final budget adoption is going to be postponed to a future meeting, that the board also postpone the completion of the truth and taxation hearings until that date. And then I think we'd be in compliance with the statutes.
Thank you.
Supervisor Christie.
First of all, I applaud the approach of Supervisor Miller, looking at really the core elements of what is the expense of the county budget, and that's employees, and also by analyzing certain districts as far as the analysis that you provided. So I'm very supportive of that approach. I think it's a necessary one, and I think it's a realistic one. We had a couple of, well, particularly one good discussion amongst the board at the last meeting, and there was some discussion about what the proposed budget might include, and some of them I think are significant, and some of them are attractive. First of all, there was talk of the proposed budget including a deputy pay raise. There was talk about accumulating money out of the general fund of at least $5 million for roads. PAYGO also required some sort of a cushion in the tax rate in order to accommodate the PAYGO issues as well. We've already mentioned the library district in particular. There's some under construction that that expense could be looked at as far as being justified. My question is, to get to where you're suggesting and where I think we would ideally like to be in the neutral situation, do you see us being able to include things like the deputy pay raise and the PAYGO and the money for the roads from the general fund?
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Christie, that was included in the budget, and I have not suggested that we take away those pay raises. Those are included in the budget, and that was the difference in the general fund when Supervisor Elias moved some of the pay increases closer in. So that's included in the budget. The PAYGO begins next year. The real effort, and Chuck proposed a 50%. 50% of as the debt is paid down, we have 17 cents. Our secondary debt rate is going to go down 17 cents next year. And what Mr. Huckleberry proposed is half of that be moved into, we'll use that for funding the PAYGO. The other half will be used for reducing our primary rate. So that is in there, that this is not impacting that. And the proposal that I had about the cops, reducing those or potentially moving away, that is specifically in Mr. Huckleberry's memo, where he stated that if we did that, it would impact that $5 million per year. So I've agreed, take that out. Okay, I don't want to impact that. And were those
Yeah, those were, and to follow up on that, the tax rate in Mr. Huckleberry's proposal, the rate was going to be lowered by 7 cents from last year's
The
rate?
primary rate.
Primary
Oh,
rate.
I was talking about pay-go.
Okay,
Yeah, and that, and how that is being accomplished is as the debt rate will be going down 17 cents per hundred of assessed value next year, and his pay-go program is using half of that for increasing the funds for the capital projects pay-go, and then using the other half to reduce rates.
Right, and so
Tax
where
rates.
do you see the tax rate ending up based on the analysis that you've done?
It'll have to be
adjusted.
provided by the county administrator. I don't have access to all of those assessor spreadsheets with all the various tax rates, and so he'll have to calculate that. But what I did was took that overall, what we need to come up with to have a bottom line tax neutral where there's no increase on the taxpayers. I handed that out last time. It's about 10.6 million total. So that is the money we need to find in order to accomplish a tax neutral budget. So it's about 10.6 million. And like I said, if, the library district, I agree with Supervisor Bronson, and I think we all do, that we shouldn't do anything with that. So that one's gonna go up. So we'll have to find in other areas to cut. That is the proposal. And one of the things I proposed last time is to look at the various expense code objects, and there was a lot of analysis done, and it doesn't look like there's a lot there. It looks like, I know Chuck said there was a potential for some, but if we did something as simple as freezing a portion of the vacancies, hiring, I think that we could accomplish that quite simply, because with the economy being the way it is, and hearing from every manager that spoke about having to hire, they all said it's very difficult to find people, and it's going to take longer to hire. And even if you did like a two-step hiring freeze, you froze for a month now, and maybe 6 months later you froze for another month, something like that. There's a potential there. So.
Anybody else? No, we'll call question.
What would the motion what would the motion on the floor be?
The motion on the floor is to approve the flood control district budget, including resolution 2019-FC3.
Could I make a substitute motion?
Yes.
You're certainly welcome to do that.
So I would like to move, I guess not just this one. Do I have to do each one individually, or?
Yes,
Okay,
Well,
So-
there's only one motion on the floor.
currently.
right.
Yeah.
This is
So
only
do
one
it
hearing.
related
So
to the
that would,
flood.
the substitute motion would just speak to that,
That's correct.
okay.
I would like to close the public hearing and move to continue the Flood Control District Board taxation hearing to the July.
Then you don't want to close the public
Oh,
hearing.
you got to leave it open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue
Yeah.
the public hearing if that's
So
what
I'd
you
like
wish.
to move to continue the public hearing on the Flood Control District Board final budget for fiscal year 1920 to July 2nd,
I'd second.
2019 board meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a substitute motion to continue the public hearing on the Flood Control District Board to the July 2nd meeting of the Pima County Board of Supervisors. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, I guess we were always going on the TNT tax neutral definition that's in statute, so now the definition is really more property tax neutral definition that we really haven't studied, to be honest with you, because it's a combined tax rate issue. So it's a little, it both gives us greater leeway, but it's also something we don't really have that much information on. I mean, ironically, if you really think about it, we're looking for a $10 million amount in the overall budget. I mean,
To become tax neutral.
right, to become property tax neutral. I'm gonna call the definition we're discussing property tax neutral.
It's not a TNT.
because it's, tax neutrality is an ARS statutory definition. But here's the irony. This year, we had an increase in state shared revenues of $2.6 million. Primarily Altex, and Chuck can get into that in some greater detail. Then, in order to make up for what has become a constitutional mistake by the Arizona legislature in the retirement systems, we have an increase in the retirement systems of ASRS, PSPRS, and EORP of $7.6 million. That totals $9.2 million. There's a pretty doggone good argument to be made that the reason this is not property tax neutral is because of state cost transfers. $9.2 million out of $10 million, that's $800,000 difference. But that brings up a little bit of a bigger question, and I was trying to gather my thoughts up a little bit better before I spoke, and right now is really when one of the things that we also asked the county administrator to put together is the budget memorandum of June 14th, which is really talks about the expenditure limit, which we haven't really talked about yet. And we really need to, I think, have a little bit more of a holistic discussion on a couple of different things. Let me start off at the larger scale, then work a little further down. Part of the issue that we have to be very, very careful of, and obviously Supervisor Miller and Supervisor Christie have kind of touched on it right now in terms of the pay-go. Remember, as we move away from, if we choose as a board to move away from certificates of participation, then what we do is in years when we've got expenditures, we'll see the expenditure spike possibly beyond the expenditure limit. And in doing that, that would require us under the Constitution, I believe, Council, right, to do an override?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor Valdez.
Under the Arizona Constitution, we'd have to issue or place on the next general ballot, which is once every 2 years, a measure to allow us to do that expenditure to make that expenditure. Sure.
Is that if we discontinue the use of cops?
It is.
Yeah, and that's why I backed off and said
Okay.
that I would agree that we'd keep using those and because of that situation,
Right,
because
okay.
that, I think you explained that in the
Yeah.
last meeting. And so I agreed
It's
at that
quirky.
time. It is quirky, yeah, because the expenditure limitation comes
Mm-hmm.
into play. And basically, if you're using cops, it's exempt from the expenditure limitation.
Right.
So that, yeah, when that was made really clear what was
Oh.
going to happen there, I definitely said, okay, let's not do that, because I think we're in the situation just getting the pay-go
Right.
program. So thank you.
Now, what I haven't seen in the memos, again, because of the different definition, and let's be very clear, Supervisor Miller's proposal, let's call it property tax neutrality, because it's not defined anywhere, and it's led to a lot of confusion, on my part especially. I don't have any information in front of me, and I have every budget memo written this year so far, about whether a property tax neutrality budget will impact pay-go or some of the other issues, or what we need to do. Obviously, we're still going to need to have truth in taxation hearings, just because we can't transfer the deficit in one end to another. So now that we've actually defined the term we're actually looking at, I don't have the information to make a good decision, is the bottom line. So I don't know whether I'm supportive or not.
That's why I'd like to make that motion to continue it so that it could be studied and analyzed and have further discussion on it.
Mr. Huckleberry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. proposal, as I understand it, is, again, it's kind of the aggregate of all of the property taxes, and so you're really looking for about 10.6 or 10.7 million dollars. And those really come from, if you added up that one column on the first page of I think the June 11th memorandum, you're gonna find that you need so much in the primary, so much in the secondary, and so much in flood control. That's 10.7. Supervisor Miller's proposal is to take, as I understand it, about 8.4 out of the flood control district, take about 2 million out of the fund balance, and so that gets you pretty close.
That is one possibility, and then
And then
the
you
hiring
talked about
freeze
yeah.
is another. I mean, it depends on, you know, whether we think we can get all 8.4 or,
Here, and what happens with the 8.4, what it effectively says is you're gonna drop the flood control district tax rate about 10 cents, from its 33 to 23. What that will do is, if you looked at the memorandum where I said the variable transfers that come out of the flood control district are all related to project development. And so what will happen is that we will pretty much stop the capital program in the flood control district for probably a couple of years until we can kind of replenish that. And the question is, how do you replenish that? Do you do it the next year? And so one of the dangers in kind of looking at these things this way is the fact that I think you pretty much postpone postpone the implementation of the pay-as-you-go program, frankly. Meaning that you move it to the next year. And so the question is what becomes the right year to implement pay-as-you-go?
well,
And I tried to basically do it in a gradual way, which basically said, and what I was doing in my pay-as-you-go proposal is taking the savings in the secondary as the debt service drops. And that's 17 cents next year, so that's significant. So that's, say, 8 cents. We knew and we know that growth in AV basically gave us about 18 cents more in the primary, with basically keeping, you know, the levy the same. So if you drop half of that, so you know, that's, you know, the gradual matching that I was trying to do to get into pay-as-you-go. One of the things that I think the whole discussion the board had previously that led to these memorandums and analysis was to go back and look at Maricopa County. And when I went back and looked at Maricopa County, you know, and I looked at one of their newsletters from, I think, the supervisor in District 1, and talking about their capital program this year in Maricopa County was $269 million. And I thought that was quite a lot. And I went back and looked at their TNTs and what happens with Maricopa County. In the last 4 years, and I think if you go back 5 and 6, they've held their rates constant, regardless of growth in AV. And so they've been able to basically build this capital pay-as-you-go program up to, you know, very $250 million a year in capital. And our goal was a lot less, we'll say, aggressive. It was really trying to build it to 50 million a year in about 4 to 5 years. So I think, you know, we can do these things. It's really up to the board. I think the difficulty is how do you then rebalance in the next year? What do you do with a flood control district the next year?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Huckleberry, one of the things I did is I took your analysis where you had the 50% over the 4-year period, it's 93.5 million. And I know in your memo you talked about Maricopa County actually did 100% to their pay-go program. So I analyzed it, and I do have a copy for the board members and you. Hopefully I got enough here. I think that's, maybe somebody can share. If you do 75%, that's an additional 46.7 million over the 4-year period. So that brings it to 140 million. And then if you did 100%, it'd be another almost $187 million. Is there a possibility we could increase that percentage to, and I think it accelerates it. And I know you had the caution that we want to bring our rate down, but maybe in the short term, we keep the rate where it is and accelerate our pay-go program to get more funding more quickly. And one of the things I was talking is if we could use some of that HERF funding, or use some of those monies for roads, and which would increase that. I don't know if the board is willing to go there, but I think accelerating our pay-go program in the following years might be able to resolve that. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Mr. Chairman and Supervisor Miller, I think, yeah, I mean, anything you can do to accelerate the pay-as-you-go, the issue will be is whether the voters and the taxpayers can, you know, actually run across the lines and see which went down and which went up, and then add the county's ones up and say, gee, it balances. I don't know if, you know, we're typically, every time they go up, we get condemned, and every time they go down, we get ignored. And so it's, you know, I mean, it's life. That's what happens. People complain about things that are adverse, and they don't say much when things get better.
I think a lot
Supervisor
of people,
Valdez?
excuse me, I think a lot
Very
of
well.
the people are looking at it, and I think you'll hear very positive feedback if we are able to maintain this tax neutral. And then I think if we use some of those fundings for road repairs, or I think you'll see great appreciation from the taxpayers, and it's a way to get those that funding without impacting the taxpayer on the bottom line. By as the debt service rate goes down, and as it goes down, I did the analysis for 3 different scenarios. I did and all the detail. I just used your spreadsheet, Chuck, and plugged in the numbers so that and there's a slight rounding error. I don't know where that came from, but it was late and I was tired. It's a few bucks, but if you look at that, I thought there's a potential, if you look at the additional revenues by year in the various scenarios. I just ran these 3. We could always do something different, of course, but it really increases those revenues and really kickstarts the pay-go program, because I know we're kind of between a rock and a hard spot with no additional, and being able to continue the use of the cops. I thought that might be a way that we could do that.
Okay, Mr. Supervisor Valdez?
Mr. Chairman, first, I have a question, and then I may have some staff direction. When you say on this sheet, and if we could please, Madam Clerk, include this in the public record so that the public has access to this as well. When we're referring to the 50%, 75%, 100%, that is 100% of the reduction in the debt,
Yes.
beginning which year?
Well, these scenarios are run as if they began in 2021. The same
okay.
as Mr. Huckleberry's 50%. So I just started the 75% and 100% both begin in 2021. And I did the detailed sheets so you can actually see the impact of the difference of the dollars year by year. It is significant. I know the caution that Mr. Huckleberry put out there, that we don't want to get into a situation where if our net assessed value goes up, that we're using 100% and we're having to do another truth and taxation hearing. So some caution, maybe 90%, or, you know, just maybe do it for 3 years at a higher rate and then bring it down. You know, all of that can be looked at. And I think that might be a good possibility of dealing with the flood district.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we have been discussing on this dais for a while now is the transition that we have to pay-go. And obviously we know that there are many different components to it and many different moving parts. So one of the first things that I want to do is direct the county administrator to develop, for the ratification of this board, a pay-go plan that has specific amounts, obviously, specific projects, how we're gonna be deciding, whatever's possible at this point, as well as what years, those projects are gonna go, so that we actually have a plan similar to the sustainability plan and some other plans, economic development plan, that this board actually has adopted and ratified, so that we know, we and the public all know when monies are gonna be spent, what they're gonna be spent on. So we're not just talking about this nebulous kind of pay as we go plan. So let's develop one. I think, for the most part, I think most of the work is actually done going forward. So I want to direct the county administrator, please develop that for the ratification of this board. Secondly, once we've developed that plan under the proposed budget, I want to see what kinds of effects the discussion points that we're having right now would have on the further development of that plan, so that we've got a starting point, as well as, okay, it's going to mean this, this, and this as far as implications, because right now we know, we think there's going to be an implication, but we don't know what that's going to be, so that we can make a values judgment as to where our priorities are in this regard, because otherwise right now we know there's going to be an effect, but we don't know what that effect's going to be. Obviously, one of the things we talked about earlier is the 6% to keep our bond rating, which leaves us right now a margin in the proposed budget of about just over $2 million. So that's got to play into that kind of discussion. But I think I'd rather err on the side of getting more information, so we can have more information and the public can have more information to make the right decisions going forward.
I think that's excellent, that we get that kind of a list out there so that it's published, it's on the record, what we're going to do.
I would
agree
also
with that.
comment
Thank
that
you.
I think that along with that, we also need to have an administrative policy procedure regarding pay-as-you-go to avoid us falling into the trap of the tyranny of the majority on this board, and to make sure that there's tax equity for every single district and the jurisdictions that exist within those districts, because pay-as-you-go is going to lend itself to that kind of dictatorial decision-making, and that is something that I think is very bad for the people of Pima County, and ultimately bad for this board as well. So I would like to include that as a part of that direction to staff as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Christie.
just to be clear, the success of the entire budget, with all of the items that we're looking at including, really is dependent on where the primary property tax rate is set. And that's the tax rate is really what drives the check that is written by the taxpayer, based also on the increase in property values. So what my concern is where is that tax rate have to be set in order to accommodate a successful pay-go and all the other items that we want to include in this, and also where does it give a benefit to the property owner, the taxpayer. So my concern is, where do we ultimately end up setting that primary property tax rate? And that's where the discussion is, really.
Mr. Huckleberry,
Yeah.
Mr.
by the assessed
Huckleberry.
value.
please, you guys.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, one other just point of discussion and give you a feel for the issue of vacancy savings and attrition. And I think one of the problems that we have is that, as I've said before, we have certain organizations that sometimes hoard PCNs for the purpose of padding their budgets, and I've kind of outlined who they are. We've been successful in bringing that down significantly, but there's room to improve. I generally don't really like attrition because it tends to hurt the small departments, and the big departments can do it. But attrition in a very small amount is probably sometimes good medicine, in the sense that if you do 1.5%, that gives you $5 million. And so it's really, you know, again, hiring freezes are difficult to implement. Again, board decision though, we'll do as directed by the board. And the attrition needs to be done very carefully, because it can't be repeated and repeated, because that just drives you into a budget hole.
I have a sense that all of this is bad for the county, and that we're not being pragmatic here in our thinking, and that really bothers me. The attrition that's going to happen, as Supervisor Miller suggests, is going to happen naturally, because those positions just can't be filled right now. So there's no reason to quibble about it. That's going to be realized. That money's going to be realized in our fund balance at the end of the year. There's not a difference. It's not a problem. It's not. And the other thing is that we have ridden the backs of our employees mercilessly over the last 10 years and been unfair to them, both in the compensation that they've received and the fact that we haven't kept up with hiring over that period of time. And our staff worked to terrible ends trying to get that done. And ultimately, many of them left the county that were very talented people, because they could see no improvement coming from us. So that troubles me to no end. And also the other thing is that pay-as-you-go is probably a good thing. I have some trepidation about it, like I said, because of tax equity related to all the districts. But in the end, I think we should get going on it now than delaying it further. Any other discussion on the substitute motion? Then let's have a roll call vote.
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Miller?
Yes.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
No. Motion passes 4-1.
Mr. Chairman?
Council, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that we also will need a motion to continue the truth and taxation hearing.
Yes.
There's 2 hearings for
We already
each of
closed it.
Mr.
Well,
Chairman?
I think, Mr. Chairman, for purposes of the statutes, the key is to
Yes.
get that agenda
Yes.
item continued to
agree.
the agenda of, I think it's August 5th.
No, I think you said July 2nd.
Oh, is it July 2nd? I'm sorry. So I think the board has discretion to reopen that hearing when we get to that meeting, but I'm just, in terms of complying with the statutes, I think we need to get that item continued.
Okay, that's
Mr.
fine.
Chairman,
We
Is there a-
continue it, correct?
Is there a way to do the whole thing in
Well,
one
we've got this
motion?
one, we can probably do the rest, but we need to deal with this one
And the
now.
one I'm looking at, I think, is agenda item 7, the Flood Control District Truth and Taxation Hearing, but it'll have to be for all 3 of the truth and
Mr.
taxation
Chairman?
hearings.
Mr. Flagg, what if instead, because obviously we've already adopted that, why don't we move to reconsider that item? And then obviously, once we vote to reconsider it, we can just continue it.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, that's fine with me. I think it was unanimous, so any board member could move to reconsider.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reconsiders item 7.
Second?
Motion and a second to reconsider item 7. Any objections? One noted for the chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valadez.
I move that we continue the item number 7 concurrent to the previous motion to the July 2nd board meeting.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion to continue the truth and taxation hearing to the meeting of July 2nd. Discussion. Objections? One noted for the chair.
Can the next motion be for the whole budget?
We need one separate one.
We need a vote. Oh, we know we did.
We did.
Never
No
mind.
objection.
Mr. Chairman, and I
Didn't we
know,
need a roll call?
Not on that motion.
Okay.
what I was going to suggest is that obviously improvement districts is not going to be part of the overall budget discussion. That one we should be able to do today,
Oh, good.
unless Mr. Flagg has an issue.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, that sounds fine with me. To get to one other thing, I think item 6 is the other one that's the
did I miss
county
that one?
truth and taxation.
Right.
Oh.
That's already been closed. I think we would want to do the same thing we
Right.
just did.
Consider.
We'll have to
Miss-
go back to that.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valdez.
I move that the board reconsiders item number 6.
Second.
Second, we have a motion and a second to reconsider item 6 in our decision to close that public hearing. Discussion? Objections? One noted for the chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valdez.
I move that we continue the hearing on item number 6, again concurrent to the previous motion to the board meeting of July 2nd.
Second.
A motion to, and a second, to continue the item 6, which is the truth and taxation hearing for the county budget, to our July 2nd meeting. Discussion? Objections? One noted for the chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valdez.
I move that we close the public hearing on item number 9 and approve the amount of the improvement districts as noted on our agenda, as well as approval of resolution number 19, 23, and 26.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the improvement district final budget as printed in our agenda, and approve items 19, 23, and 26, and close public hearing. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Miller?
Yes.
Supervisor Valdez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We're on to item 10. This is a hearing for the Library District Board budget.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Valdez.
I'm going to move that we continue item 10 and 11 to the board meeting of July 2nd.
Second.
We have a motion to continue items 10 and 11 to our July 2nd meeting. Discussion? Why don't we do a roll call just to make sure we're okay on this?
Supervisor Bronson?
Aye.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Miller?
Yes.
Supervisor Valdez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
No? Okay, motion carries 4-1.
Mr.